Okay, we're continuing on in the book of Acts tonight, and chapter 23 we're getting into tonight. So let's dive into it. There's going to be an interesting word that comes up because there's a group of people that are kind of called by this word. So I thought that word was interesting. So stay tuned, let's have a look. When we left Paul, remember we did 2 chapters last week? Bit of a cliffhanger. I wanted to see what happened. Then there was another cliffhanger. Paul's still in jail. Let's have a look. When we left Paul, he was before the Sanhedrin, defending himself against some vague charges of blasphemy. Although the Roman tribune who had custody of Paul still isn't sure exactly what it is that Paul has said or done that has so many Jews in Jerusalem in such a homicidal mood. Why are the Jews in such a rage? Well, what we're seeing here is not actually the common everyday variety of traditional Jews. I thought this was interesting. They're in such a violent rage because these aren't the everyday traditional working class Jews here who want to tear Paul to shreds, but rather it is the members of the political party or faction called the Zealots. Very interesting, these Zealots. So before we get into the scripture, we'll see who the Zealots are. The Zealots were Jewish supernationalists, extremely fanatical in their loyalty and devotion to Israel. Extremely fanatical in their devotion to their land. So they hated Gentiles with a passion, openly preached civil disobedience, Gentiles being the Romans that were actually ruling them, and of course anybody else that wasn't a Jew. But that would get a bit sticky when it was the Romans, because they were actually conquered by the Romans, so this is where it got complicated. So they preached civil disobedience and revolt against Rome, constant revolutions, and expected every Jew to observe the Jewish oral law down to the last detail as proof of their loyalty to their Jewish heritage. Remember this guy? Remember this guy from the show? Mm-hmm. That's what he was. That's why he was so physically trained, doing jump kicks in the forest and stuff, because he was a soldier. Simon, yeah, the zealot. So, even more violent and murderous faction called the Sicarii were an offshoot of the zealots. Yahusha's traitorous follower Judas was also a zealot as well. That was interesting. First, Paul is being accused by some Jews of teaching against circumcision for Jews, which is considered a crime against Moses, and that he spoke against the traditions. Second is that a person on pilgrimage to Jerusalem from Asia for the occasion of Pentecost says that Paul spoke against the temple, even bringing a Gentile into the temple and defiling the sacred buildings and its set-apart grounds by bringing Gentiles in. According to the scriptural law of Moses, there is no death penalty for teaching against circumcision or for not being circumcised. And scripturally speaking, it is not a capital crime to bring a Gentile into the temple courtyard area or to speak against the temple. It's not a capital crime. That's the point. But it's a Jewish oral law and tradition, especially Judean, had made it a capital crime. So Moses didn't. Yahushua didn't make it a capital crime in the commandments or anything, but the Jews had made it a capital crime. So the bottom line is that Paul had greatly irritated the super nationalist zealots, who were easily irritated, and they stirred up many other Jews, mostly because Paul dutifully took the Jewish message of a Jewish Messiah who gave deliverance and offered it to the hated Gentile nations. That's why they hate him so much, because they were zealots, they were nationalists, they were extremely racist. How dare you say that a Jewish Messiah came and offered it to the Gentiles? And the zealots' response to most problems that raised their passions was to kill the person they disagreed with and to characterize the deed as their pious obligation as defenders of Elohim or the land. But it's like modern day terrorists, really. It's like a terrorist. But in reality, they were not defending Yahuwah's word at all. They were defending Jewish oral law. which had been formulated in the institution of the synagogue. We'll see a bit more of that later. They were more defenders of man-made customs and traditions than actual scriptural commandments. This was because they were first and foremost, in these unbearable days of occupation by Rome, they were defenders of Jewishness and all that it entailed. But Paul was seen as fraternizing with the enemy, and so that made him a target. Just thought that was interesting to see why there's such a violent hatred coming at Paul. Because the everyday person who's out working in the field, comes home to his wife and kids, might have had a bit of irritation, but they're not having this thunderous, violent reaction. So why are the crowds being like that? Because they're being spurred up by these zealots, terrorists. So, back to Paul. Paul's been taken before the High Council Sanhedrin at the end of last chapter. So let's get into Acts 23. So Paul looked intently at the council members and said, "Brothers, I have lived my life with a clear conscience before Yahusha. I have always done what I thought was right." Ananias, the high priest, was there, and when he heard this, he told the men who were standing near Paul to hit him in the mouth. All he said was that. And the high priest said, hit him in the mouth. Which, in this culture, to shame him. For in Middle Eastern, then as well as now, a male being struck on the face caused him to lose his honour. An extremely serious and volatile matter in all Oriental society, which is what this is. So it's about honour, stripping him of his honour, just because he said, I've got a clear conscience. Paul said to Ananias, you better watch out, because Yahushua will hit you too. You're like a dirty wall that's been whitewashed. You sit there and judge me using the law of Moses, but you are telling them to hit me, which is also against the same law. See how it pays to know the law? Just throwing it right back at him. The men standing near Paul said to him, are you sure you want to insult Elohim's high priest like that? Paul said, oh, brothers, I didn't know he was the high priest. For the scriptures say you mustn't speak evil about the ruler of your people. Paul is being sarcastic. This is a battle of wits. He's letting the high priest know that he certainly doesn't behave like a ruler or someone in authority. So how would anyone know he was the high priest? That's the irony of it. And the sarcasm is the fact that everyone, of course, knew who the high priest was because of the way he was dressed. It's obvious who the high priest is. Paul obviously knew who the high priest was. Paul was only being Paul, someone who was harsh and sarcastic on occasion and felt no guilt for it due to his accuser's behaviour. They're standing up there, judging him, getting him smacked in the face. So what was it about Paul's words that offended the high priest so much? Because this is the same thing, different high priest, but the same thing that happened to Yahusha. Let's have a look in John 18. The high priest questioned Yahusha about his followers and about what he taught. Yahusha answered, I've spoken quite openly to everyone. I have always taught in a synagogue or in the temple where all Jews meet together. I have said nothing in secret. So why are you questioning me? Question the ones who heard what I said to them. Look, they know what I said. At these words, one of the guards standing by slapped Yahusha in the face and said, this is how you talk to the high priest? Yahusha answered him, if I said something wrong, state publicly what was wrong. But if I was right, why are you hitting me? See? Same hatred. So Yahusha, speaking to the high priest, certainly had something to say about being unjustly struck. And, like Paul, he was struck on the face, which was intended to shame him. Notice that Yahusha doesn't appear to have said anything against the high priest any more than Paul did. Yahusha merely asked why they were questioning him, while Paul only stated his own good Jewish character, good conscience. But in both cases, this was seen as an affront to the high priest. This is why. Yahusha was dealing with Caiaphas, and Paul was dealing with Ananias, who was the 8th high priest to follow Caiaphas. Both men were illegitimate high priests. This is why they were so offended. Both men were illegitimate high priests. They were not of the proper lineage from Aaron's eldest son, more specifically. They were wealthy and had paid large sums of money to the Roman authorities for their positions. They were aristocrats, Sadducees, the highest class of society, who saw themselves as entitled and far better than common Jews. A bit like the royal family today. You don't have to do anything. You just buy your way in, conquer your way in, and just have it, and you just are it. A leech on society. This is what these guys did. They didn't earn it. They weren't even from the right authorised by Torah line of Aaron. So for Yahusha and now Paul to say anything before them or to them was an affront. And although it wouldn't hold true for Yahusha, Paul was a Pharisee, a direct competitor and antagonist to the Sadducees. They inherently didn't like one another. This gets interesting. So after Paul is hit in his mouth, he spontaneously spews an insult towards this illegitimate high priest, Ananias, calling him a whitewashed wall, a fake, a phony. That's why he was so furious, because he is a fake, he is a phony, and he knows it. He bought his way into the high priestery. So remember that, Paul was a Pharisee, and a lot of these guys in this council are Sadducees. So first he mocks the high priest after he got struck, and look what he does next. Paul knew that half the men in the council meeting were Sadducees and the other half were Pharisees. So he shouted, "My brothers, I'm a Pharisee myself, and my father was a Pharisee also. I'm only on trial here today because I believe that people will rise from the dead. That's the only reason I'm on trial, because I believe people will rise from the dead." Believes in the resurrection. Check this out. When Paul said this, a big argument started between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the whole council was divided. Nice way to divert the attention off him, wasn't it? The Sadducees don't believe in resurrection after death, nor angels or spirits, but the Pharisees believe in both. All these Jews began shouting louder and louder. Some of the scribes, who were also Pharisees, stood up and argued, "Oh, we find nothing wrong with this man. Maybe an angel or a spirit really did speak to him." So now he's getting people on his side a bit. The argument turned into a fight, and the commander was afraid that the Jews would tear Paul to pieces. So he told the soldiers to go down and take Paul away from these Jews and put him in the army building. Now the clever Paul changes tactics. His sarcasm turns to artful calculation. Having served on the Sanhedrin in some capacity in the past, he knows how they work and how they think, and he is well aware of the hatred between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So he announces himself as a Pharisee and throws out the hot button topic of resurrection from the dead, like a piece of raw meat into a den of starving lions. You could just picture it. In fact, he frames the persecution he is undergoing on this very issue. And we know that resurrection is true because concerning the resurrection, Paul says, "For if the dead are not raised, then the Messiah has not been raised either. If it's not possible for dead people to rise from the dead, then Messiah hasn't been raised, which means your trust is useless and you're still in your sins." So I think we should believe that resurrection is true. It's the whole cornerstone of our belief, really. Yahushua died, rose again. He's alive. Paul's theological warfare now replaced whatever rational investigation Lysias was hoping for. Now he has an unfixable mess on his hands, this Lysias. And when that happens, there's only one solution: give it to your boss. Pass him up the chain. So after all this happened, the next night, the master, Paul's been taken down to the barracks, for his own safety. The next night, the master Yahusha came and stood by Paul, saying, "Be brave, my son. You have told people in Jerusalem about me. Now you must do the same thing. Now you must do the same again and be my witness in Rome." He's been out to all the places he could go out in the other islands on all his journeys. Been in Jerusalem, now he's got to be his witness in Rome. The next morning, some of the Jews conspired to kill Paul. It's probably these, what do we call it? Zealots. Conspired to kill Paul, vowing that they would not eat or drink anything until they had killed him. There were more than 40 of them who made this plan. They went and talked to the chief priests and the Jewish elders. Wouldn't you think if you went to the spiritual leaders of the nation that you'd get in trouble for planning a murderous ambush? No, these guys are all on board. This shows you the state, the rip-off of the Jewish the high priest and the council and everything. The priesthood was completely corrupt. So these guys go and tell the eldership, saying, "We have vowed not to eat or drink until we've killed Paul. So this is what we want you to do. Send a message to the commander from you and the high council. Tell him you want him to bring Paul out to you. Say that you want to ask him more questions. Then we will be waiting in ambush to kill him while he's on the way here." So this is their plan they're hatching, to get rid of this troublemaker. But Paul's nephew, his sister's son, heard about this plan, went to the army building and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the army officers and said to him, "Take this young man to the commander, for he's got a message for him." So the army officer brought Paul's nephew to the commander. And the officer said, "The prisoner Paul asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to tell you." The commander led the young man to a place where they could be alone. The commander said, "What do you want to tell me?" The young man said, "Some Jews have decided to ask you to bring Paul down to their council meeting tomorrow. They want you to think that they plan to ask Paul more questions, but don't believe them. More than 40 of them are hiding in ambush, waiting to kill him. They have all vowed not to eat or drink until they've killed him. Now they're just waiting for you to approve." The commander sent the young man away, telling him, "Don't tell anyone that you have told me about their plan." Then the commander called 2 army officers, saying to them, "I need some men to go to Caesarea. Get 200 soldiers ready. Also get 70 soldiers on horses, 200 men to carry spears. Be ready to leave at 9 o'clock tonight. Get some horses for Paul to ride so that he can be taken back to Governor Felix safely." The commander wrote a letter that said, "From Claudius Lysias to the most honourable Governor Felix. Greetings. Some Jews had taken this man and planned to kill him, but I learnt that he is a Roman citizen." Remember last week? I learnt that he's a Roman citizen. So I went with my soldiers and rescued him. I wanted to know why they were accusing him. So I brought him before their council meeting. This is what I learnt. The Jews said this man did some things that were wrong, but these charges were about their own Jewish laws, and there was nothing worthy of jail or death. Why is he still in jail then? Interesting. He's still a prisoner. I was told that some of the Jews were making a plan to kill him, so I decided to send him to you. I also told those Jews to tell you what they have against him." The soldiers did what they were told. They got Paul and took him to the city of Antipatris that night. The next day the soldiers on horses went with Paul to Caesarea, but the other soldiers and the spearmen went back to the army building in Jerusalem. The soldiers on horses entered Caesarea, gave the letter to Governor Felix, and then turned Paul over to him.
What a predicament.
Oh, someone else's problem now. This is like a soap opera, isn't it? Back and forward. The governor read the letter and asked Paul, "What country are you from?" The governor learnt that Paul was from Cilicia. The governor said, "I will hear your case when the Jews who are accusing you come here too." So we need witnesses, obviously. Then the governor gave orders for Paul to be kept in the palace built by Herod. So he's getting higher and higher up in the ranks, isn't he? Now he's been sent to the governor. Pontius Pilate was one of the governors, just to give you some context, of Rome, sent out to occupy little pieces of Israel. So now he's been kept in the palace built by Herod. Paul is once again under attack from fellow Jews who think that he has become a traitor to Judaism, or to be more precise, a traitor to his Jewishness. Terms like Judaism and Jewishness can be challenging to precisely define. In ancient Judaism, all the sects maintained the common belief that Yahuah was their only Elohim. But after that, there were so many nuances and variations that led to several sects of Judaism being formed. So we see that the religion of the Jews, Judaism, as it was eventually labelled, was merely one of several necessary elements of one's life that served to identify you and qualify you as a Jew. Religion was only one part of what made a Jew a Jew. There were several other cultural parts. Generally speaking, remove or renounce any of these parts and your Jewishness would be questioned. So where did the religion of the Jews in the first century, Judaism, come from? Where did all this nonsense come from? It was not taken from the scripture. You'll never find the word synagogue or find their liturgical practices in the Old Blood Covenant writings. You don't see the word synagogue anywhere in the Old Testament. This is a product of the synagogue system. No, I missed a line. Rather, Judaism was a new phenomenon, a product of the synagogue system, a new man-made system which resulted from the unpleasant circumstances of the Babylonian exile, 600 BC, that left the Jews living in foreign lands, spiritually adrift, without their temple or priesthood. Prior to their exile, it was the temple system, as we know, Solomon. Prior to that, it was the temple system that had formed their authorized praise and sacrifice structure and was the focal point of their spiritual life, the tabernacle and then the temple. But now, without that temple and priesthood, their structure was defunct, gone. And they can't not have a structure, can they? They can't not, even though Yahushua had left the temple, we can't have that. We'll be a laughing stock. We have to maintain some kind of system. So the leaders among the exiled Jews devised an alternative system that eventually came to be known as Judaism, because Jews were people from the tribe of Judah. Therefore the term Judaism. Judaism, get that? Judaism. The religion of Judah. Judaism incorporated many familiar elements of the original Torah-defined system that depended on the temple, a system that at Mount Sinai Yahuah had defined and commanded to apply to all 12 tribes of Israel. However, this newly modified Jewish religion dropped many of the elements of their former belief that seemed impractical, if not impossible, considering their situation, beginning with how and where they worshipped, where their worship occurred. Most importantly, Judaism added new practices to compensate for the lack of the temple and priesthood and presence, and thus their inability to sacrifice to atone for their sins. But also because this modified religion was meant to apply primarily to the survivors of the Babylonian exile, that's Judah, the Jews, and not necessarily to any of the other tribes, their brother tribes, that had long ago experienced their own exile, from which they had never returned. So especially as concerning Jews who freely chose to remain in foreign lands, that's what they call diaspora Jews, instead of eventually returning to the set-apart land, what it meant to be Jewish wasn't the same as compared to what it meant before the exile. And for those fervent Jews, zealous Jews, terrorist Jews, who did return to the set-apart land, Jewishness meant something a little different than how the scattered Jews viewed it. Thus, set-apart land Jews and diaspora Jews were always at odds with one another over the question of what is a Jew? Or to say it a bit differently, what constitutes a universally recognised and acceptable Jewishness among people who identify themselves as Jews? So, basically this mob was very upset about Paul in a general way, clearly because he hasn't done anything wrong. Was Paul still a real Jew? Was Paul speaking and teaching against familiar, comfortable, traditional Jewishness? Might Paul be trying to redefine Jewishness? Heaven forbid. A never-ending matter among Jews anyway? Was Paul turning his back on his Jewish heritage altogether and becoming a Gentile? Clearly not, because he was going to the feasts and whatnot, and growing his hair for a vow and all that stuff, and urging other Jews to cave in and do the same. Or had Paul experienced a new heart and spirit and was now looking to his true heritage in Yahusha's new commonwealth and reign? Is Paul grasping something that it's not really about where you come from? It's about where you're going, the seed that's planted in you. Today, Yahusha's living word is heard today on the babbling lips of English, and indeed every language. For his new covenant behaviour transcends all culture and language. For the bride he wants today are those who worship him in spirit and in truth, from a new heart and a new spirit. Can you see that? It doesn't matter about the language that you speak from day to day. It's about your behaviour. So these zealots that were up the top, these terrorists, I thought, what does zealot mean? Look up zealot, there's no response, but zeal, it's very interesting because these guys were full of zeal. That's why they called them zealots. Zealots. Let's look at this word zeal because this applies to us. It means to glow or grow warm. Figuratively, to blaze up of anger, zeal, jealousy. So what's another word for zeal? Anger, jealousy. To be angry, to burn, be displeased, earnestly, fret self, to grieve, be hot, be incensed, kindle, very, be wroth. So is this a passive adjective? Is this somebody who keeps it all inside and is very passive?
No.
Or is this somebody who, no matter what emotion it is, it's loud and proud and doing it? If it's angry, it's angry. If it's hot, it's hot. If it's jealous, it's going to let you know. This is a very outward adjective. It also means to be jealous or envious. Envious, be moved to, provoked to, jealously, very zealous. Jealousy or envy, jealousy, sake, zeal. Another word there is passionate as well. It's good. I like that word, passionate. Dictionary in English, zeal means great enthusiasm or energy, great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. Got that? And there's all the words, some of them you'll see in Scripture, for zeal, to be passionate, zealous, committed, ardour, love, fervour, fire, avidity, fondness, devotion, your devotedness, enthusiasm, eagerness, keenness. Take this to yourself. Do I show any of this in the things that I do from morning to night? Am I passionate? Am I zealous? Do I do things with this kind of behaviour? Or, as the opposite says, am I apathetic, indifferent in what I'm doing? Do I do things, oh yeah, half-assed, yeah, comme ci, comme ça, whatever. Let's look at some scriptures. In John 2, Yahusha said, take these things away. This is when he was whipping the people out of the temple area, all the money changers. Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. Later, his followers remembered that it was written by King David, my zeal for your house will consume me. My zeal my passion for your house. Where's his house? We are his house. This area, this fellowship is his house. We are his house, more specifically. My zeal for your house will consume me. Isn't that the whole idea? To be consumed, to be sacrificed, to give it up. Ezekiel said, so my anger will be spent, and I will satisfy my wrath on them, and I will be appeased. Then they will know that I, Yahuah, have spoken in my zeal. Saw what zeal was? Fury, anger, passion, ardour. I've spoken in my zeal when I have spent all my wrath upon them. So does Yahuah look very happy there? Paul says in Galatians, for you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the fellowship of Yahusha beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my peers among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. We just talked about all those traditions. That was what he was passionate about, his traditions. What happened to his national heritage and his traditions the minute he met Yahusha? And was, struck off his horse. Did it matter much? No. When you encounter Yahusha, it's a very different thing. 1 Corinthians, so also you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts. Isn't that what we want to see manifesting among us, spiritual gifts? Since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, seek to overflow and abound with encouragement for Yahusha's bridal fellowship. Who knew encouragement was a spiritual gift? Not me. So anybody who says, I know I can't do this, I don't have a gift, I don't have a talent, I'm not good at anything. You can encourage, can't you? Encouragement is to be around somebody who's encouraging, lifting. What does that feel like? You walk away walking on air, don't you? You feel Yahusha's love. That's what encouragement does. It's a spiritual gift. Didn't know that? Since you are zealous, passionate, wanting spiritual gifts, here, cop this one. Take that first. We should all do that one and see what comes from that. Can you see how that's the way to go? Come on, mate. What is Yahusha passionately zealous about? Throw me some answers. What is Yahusha passionately zealous about?
His chosen people.
Yep. What is Yahusha passionate about?
Behavior.
Yeah. Am I getting any passionately zealous responses?
Us.
Are we blazing up in jealous zeal to guard it, what he finds passionate? What response does he require from you? What do you get out of all of that? It was one word, it should be easy for you.
Encouragement and passion.
Zeal. Do I see any zeal going on right now? Passionate. What was the opposite of it?
Zealous.
What was the opposite of it?
Apathy.
Apathy. Indifferent. Half-assed. It's not supposed to be heavy. I just want you to know that if you're going to do something for Yahusha, how are you supposed to do it? Apart from immediately, how are you supposed to do it? Full on. Do it full on or don't do it at all. Because if you're going to do it half-assed and not passionately, because if you don't do something passionately, does that show you actually believe it?
No.
Or are you just doing it because, someone's told me I have to do this, so I have to do it. Stuff, I'll do it, and then it's done, I can go back to what I want to do. That's not the way Yahusha operates. He wants you to do things in belief and wait for a reaction, wait for a response, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're hearing his voice, we should do it, respond immediately, and do it passionately. If the word zealous is going to fall out of your head, think of the word passion. Or wholeheartedly, as Christopher said. Wholeheartedly. Do it. That's how we should be behaving. Morning, noon and night. And what's the most important thing that he's passionate about?
Us. The word. His word.
His word. Because his word is the only thing in us that's any use. His word is him. He is his seed. It's all the same. It's him in us. That's the only thing useful and good in us. So that's what he's passionate about. Us taking that within us, growing it, manifesting it, activating it. Passionately. Start showing some passion in your voice. I was young once. I used to talk like this, and I used to, mumble and prattle along and cause trouble and everything. You've got to come out of yourself and express yourself. Up, down, soft. Use your voice like Christopher was showing you last week. Bring Yahusha through your personality. So that's where it led me tonight, just from looking at the zealots. But why are they called zealots? What does that mean? Because these guys, if you cross them, they'll kill you. That's how passionate they were. No, we don't have to be that passionate that we kill somebody that doesn't agree with Yahusha. But we have to be passionate about Yahusha. Don't we? Would anybody like to add any thoughts to that? Want a drink?
Covered it very well.
You want to add something, Bob?
Yeah. Can I add a question?
Yeah.
Why would they kill people?
Well, because they were passionate about Israel. They didn't like what had happened.
What is Israel?
What is Israel? We'll talk about that later, mate. I'm not going into a whole discussion about Israel right now. Okay? You were here last week. We discussed it. Okay. Victoria, you want to come out to the 𝗪𝗘𝗘𝗦?
Yep.
You guys can man your instruments as well. We're just going to go through a song. While we're singing that song, anybody who would like prayer, anybody who would like to become more passionate, would like to offload what's weighing them down, that's how we become passionate for Yahusha. Got to come into his house, darling, if you can do that. Come down and use the altar. Yahusha is here. Did you feel his presence tonight?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Well, he's here for you. We are here for you. We will pray with you. Got a pen?
I have to just look back in.
You're right, darling. Take your time. We have come into this house through your mighty name to love you. Come into this house. We have come into this house through your mighty name to love you. We have come into this house through your mighty name to love you. Shall love you, Yahusha. Forget about yourself. So forget about yourself. Concentrate on him and follow him. Put your minds on Yahusha. So forget about yourself. Concentrate on him and follow him. So forget about yourself. Concentrate on him and follow Yahusha. Follow Yahusha. Let us lift our voices high. Let us lift our voices high. Magnify his name and praise him. Let us lift our voices high. Magnify his name and praise him. Let us lift our voices high. Let us lift our voices high. Magnify his name and praise him as our King. Praise him, Yahusha. To the top. As we praise him in this house, sit upon the throne among you.
upon your throne among us. As we praise you in this house, sit upon your throne and fill us with your love. Fill us with your love. Back to the top. We have come to this house through your mighty name to love you. We have come into this house through your mighty name to love you. We have come to this house through your mighty name to love you, Yahusha. Love you, Yahusha. We have come to this house through your mighty name to love you. We have come into this house. We have come into this house through your mighty name to love you. Yes, we have come into this house through your mighty name to love you, Yahusha. I love you, Yahusha. I love you, Yahusha. I love you, Yahusha. I love you, Yahusha. Thank you for gathering with us tonight, Yahusha. Thank you for the wonderful nature, the wonderful caring mind and heart you have towards your people. We thank you that you are transforming your bride into who she needs to be so that she can be part of the wedding feast. Please keep us protected. Please help us to keep you on our minds all day. That's what you want. We can see that. Train us to keep you on our minds and know that you are in every single thought that we need to check. Bless everybody this week, Yahusha. Bless our families. We love you so much. So be it. I want to be lionized by a secret love today, a radiant heat that comes upon me as I pray. Yahusha, you've forgiven every filth and washed me clean, and I'm gonna be rising up to meet you when the shofars blow real soon. If I'm overcome in this world, I will gain your crown. Majestic city, a white stone and wedding gown. Yahusha, train me in your living words and breathe your truth. You've opened my eyes up, this race I be running. Now I'm overcoming for you. Embracing your disciplines, listening to your voice today. I'm trying to only speak when you give me words to say. Yahusha, I was once asleep, oblivious to you. I was in the arena, wallowing beguiled. Then you ran out to rescue me. So I'm overcome in this world, I won't let you go. No matter how high the mountain top or valley low. Yahusha, I felt no deeper purpose sitting at your feet. My wonderful Savior, precious Redeemer, now I'm overcoming for you. No matter what the freaks say, I shall not be moved. I ain't turning back, 'cause Yahusha, you are everything to me. And I plant my feet on every word that proceeds from you. And when I do, all the noises fade. Then you look at me and you tell me to keep going, son, and how proud you are, and just how much you love me. So I'm overcoming this world, I will gain your crown. Majestic city, a white stone and wedding gown. I'm overcoming this world, I won't let you go. No matter how high the mountaintop or valley low, I'm overcoming this world, I won't let you down. Majestic city, a white stone and wedding gown. I'm overcoming, I won't let you go. No matter how high the mountain top or valley low. You're sure I've never felt so deep a purpose sitting at your feet. My wonderful Savior, precious Redeemer, you've opened my eyes up, this race I be running. Now I'm overcoming, I'm overcoming, I'm overcoming for you.